Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother into the temple, previously here for the cross-time setting for Fate, now coming back to us with Infinitum. I'm hoping that's the right way to say it. If not, feel free to correct me.
It is actually Infinitum.
Yep, Infinitum. I kind of figured it was one or the other. The one and only Emlyn Freeman. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right.
Oh.
Well, thank you very much for having me back in the temple.
Yeah, thank you for coming back and braving time zone hell. Even though it's only a 2-hour difference between you and me, it's time zone hell is time zone hell regardless.
Indeed, indeed. Although it's always easier to be a little earlier than later, so it's harder for you.
When I'm dealing with time zones in continental North America, it's relatively easy. It's when you're jumping across the pond that things get interesting.
Indeed.
But now obviously when it comes to the origin story, we've done that. This is not your first rodeo here in my monastery. But with the concept of infinitum, this I ended up saying it the wrong way again, sorry. Infinitum. Nope,
you did it. Infinitum is correct.
Yeah. Jeez, why am I second guessing myself? Anyway, this idea of a city at the center of a multiverse. I think when a lot of people hear that, one of the first things that is going to come up to them is the city of, Sigil in the Planescape universe. And I'm curious if that was an influence on the concept here.
Yes, it was definitely one of the models, one of the initial inspirations. Planescape is a favorite of mine. In particular, the video game Planescape Torment is a favorite of mine. I've never actually gotten a Planescape tabletop campaign together, in part because I have never cared for the second edition of D&D, but I've always been fascinated by the Planescape setting, This was that was one of the inspirations for this setting. Is definitely trying to evoke some of that feeling, while definitely trying to play in my own space as well. But definitely um, some of the same themes are present. Some of the same mood is present, and it's definitely one of the inspirations.
And what would you say is the appeal of a concept like Sigil, and subsequently Infinitum? This idea of a mother city within this vast multiverse.
Well, I think one of the biggest um, appeals to me is the bizarreness of it. I am very bored of Tolkienian fantasy, and I really like this the almost surrealist nature of Planescape, a modern game that it would be I would say it was an influence if it hadn't come out well after I had already written the game. Is Invisible Sun, but it's definitely something that it would have spoken to Infinitum's themes and ideas. It's the weirdness, the doing something really unusual with fantasy, something that that you don't see other places, something that takes everything and throws it all in a hodgepodge, throws it all in a stew, and pulls up something that you haven't seen before, instead of yet another Aragorn the Ranger and Drizzt Stewart, and for the 10 millionth time.
Yeah, what I've referred to in my monastery as the Tolkien melting pot, and I will note from my perspective that I have nothing against Tolkien or Tolkien-esque fantasy. What I've always had an issue with, and this is probably something you shared, is the idea that if you're doing fantasy, that's what you have to do. Not that it's a good idea, but that you have to do it simply because of tradition for its own sake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I went through a period of my life for about probably 15 years where I was really, really against Tolkienian and like the D&D model of fantasy, and I just felt like it had no purpose at all. But I feel more now that that if it's done well, there is something to be something really to be gained there. Like the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie was really good. The Baldur's Gate 3 is amazing. If and so that there's definitely still a lot to be mined from there if you are actually doing something quality there. It's just that I'm not interested in that space for my own self, and I resent the idea that that's the only space that's available for fantasy.
Yeah, I've that's what I've often talked about when it comes to this idea of design by gospel. In not too many words, design by gospel is the mindset of, we do things a certain way because we've always done things a certain way. Why do we do things that way? Because we've always done it. And if that sounds a bit circular, well, it's because it is. I guess if I had to use a non-TTRPG example of that reaching its natural conclusion, I suppose I could bring up the state of certain racing games that feel very samey. The ones that lean a bit more simulation, there's not a whole lot of variety in terms of their look, feel, and whatnot, because all of them are trying to emulate the exact same thing. That's obviously not the case with Simcades, but it is funny that we bring up Planescape in this, because I distinctly remember going on forums and seeing people argue that Planescape should be treated as science fiction and not fantasy, because it was, and I quote one infamous post, that while the original site has gone by the wayside, this remark has been burned into my brain, which I will admit, if your only exposure to fantasy is that Western European pastiche, okay, fine. But you've probably read through some of the old pulp fantasy stuff from way back in the day, just as much as I have, I'm guessing.
Yeah, some of it, like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, and some of the a little bit of the original, the Jack Vance stuff, the Dying Earth, that Vancian, where Vancian casting came from, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff in there that, especially in the old pulp stuff over the last 100 years, that veers into flirtations of science fiction. Like that whole hard line between fantasy and SF isn't as hard of a line as I think some people have. I won't say believe it is, but have talked themselves into believing it is.
Yeah.
And I think in that same vein, I think it's just as important to have the option for other types instead of designed by gospel, because as I kind of hinted at, when you have that, it ends up not being.
I'm sorry. Can we pause for just a moment?
We can.
Okay, hold on. My.
Sorry about that, folks. But continuing a bit onward with that. I think one of the big things that people are going to notice early on with Infinitum is the city creation concept. And I have seen this idea of collaborative setting creation. But was it a case where you ended up building the idea of city creation first and then building the rest of Infinitum, or was it a case of the latter?
Well, it's interesting. I'm trying to remember, because that is a piece of it that comes back from the very early parts of the design, and this is a game that I've been working on off and on for about 15 years. So that the city creation stuff, the rules for it come from partly from the Fate core system, and partly from the earlier version of Fate, the Dresden Files system, and that was I believe if I'm remembering correctly, the original spark of Infinitum came from a couple sources, but for one, from um, an offhand remark in a Neil Gaiman short story about someone being dead-blooded, and I thought about what would it mean to have dead blood, and that kind of sprinted off into the whole concept of the bloodlines that are the foundation of all of the various types of people that live in the city, and the other one being trying to create a fantasy setting so that I could role play with my wife, because she hates science fiction and only wants to role play fantasy, and I had not. I wanted to design a game that we would both be interested in playing together, and so I took something, this fantasy idea I'd been noodling around with, and created that. In terms of the creating the bits, those bits kind of came together, and I want to say that the ideas of the city and the ideas of the city creation came together pretty early on in the process. I wish I could remember more clearly, but as I said, it was 15 years ago, so I don't remember too terribly well. But I do remember that I thought that the city creation process used in the Dresden Files RPG was one of the coolest parts of that design space, and I knew I wanted to use it way back when. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely a part of it, a part of wanting to of what I wanted to do with it when I was creating the system.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And as I understand it, there's a set of pillars that you kind of have it built around. These are meant to be the principal things that, regardless of how the city takes place, what form it takes place, this is meant to be consistent. And with that kind of thing in mind, do you have plans on making a kind of city sheet of sorts in the future, or is that already in the works?
That kind of depends on if there's any interest in the game, really. For anything that I put out, I kind of throw it out there and see if there's any interest. Mm-hmm. Thus far, I haven't had anything that people have really latched onto to the point where I've found that it's been worth my time to create extra content for. I'm because I always have extra ideas, so many ideas for new things that I have not. So I haven't wanted to go back if there isn't some desire for it. I always have new ideas, unless there's some reason to stick with a particular project. So if there's something where people are wanting some more information on Infinitum as the city, then I'll be happy to provide such a thing. But as it stands, there's a good amount of information in the back of the book. There's information on each of the there's about a page or so about in each of the districts, that has a couple of locations for each district, and that provides a lot of places and faces that you could use to populate your city. And there's a fairly large bestiary of both people and creatures to populate your city as well. Because I always figure that while I like to create characters and places, I also never have time when I'm preparing an adventure, so I like to pull those things out of a book. So that's what I like to provide for people. So I always like to make sure that there's a robust bestiary instead of leaving people to create all of that on the fly. So yeah, there's a fair bit in there, but I'm always open to creating more.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, I think one of the more interesting things in character creation is the optional, even though it's an optional step, but the idea of archetypes, which is not something you usually see in Fate when it comes to the character creation process. Is that a means to allow people to come to guide themselves into a concept instead of being thrown right in the middle of it, since Fate can do that?
Yeah, essentially, it's kind of a way to have a character class if you want one, but but that's why it's optional, because Fate is not very strongly. It doesn't very strongly allow for character classes, and you certainly don't. You don't need to take one if you don't want to. I mean, the archetypes, all they are in the game is just a way of just some suggestions, essentially, of how to put together a package of skills and stunts. So it doesn't actually like provide any sort of advantage or disadvantage, as opposed to every other mechanical choice in the game, which does. But it's just a way to make it a little easier for people to jump on board, where it's to get a character class, especially given that it's a weirder world, and so I feel like that's pretty helpful for people. I even originally in an earlier iteration of the game, I had another bloodline that was a Tolkienian outlander race that was the outlanders being the people from outside the city, they were just like the regular folks coming in from a D&D-esque world, so to make people that was like for the new people, new players coming in. And I eventually decided that that was just too boring. But the archetypes were my way to still kind of make it a little easier to guide people in. Similarly for the factions, that's another optional way to kind of guide people into the game in this kind of weirder world. A way to sort of give people options that'll make their characters make a little more sense to them than than having to create their people entirely from scratch, as in a more typical Fate game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can rely on genre conventions in some games, but when you're dealing with a setting that's a little bit more off the beaten path, it's best to provide that sort of thing because, well, uh, it's one of those things where every game is inevitably someone's first.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a bad habit of people over relying on the idea of genre or system familiarity, which I don't think is something that a design should do. I mean, obviously there's going to be some familiarity just by the zeitgeist, but that idea of you know how an RPG works, so you'll be fine. It's like they might, but they might not know how this one works.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that point in terms of my stuff, because it's I like to. It's like every game is someone's first, but the chances that one of my games is going to be someone's first are infinitesimal. Because how is someone going to come across one of my weird little games in the middle of just instead of their first game being, Dungeons and Dragons, or or even something indie but more well established, like, I don't know, the what's Critical Role's thing they're coming out with now? Daggerheart, I think. Yeah,
yeah.
it's, something that's that's got a little more cachet. So it's like I feel that it's like I don't want to talk down to the people who do have some understanding of the conventions, but I also don't want to assume that they know what they're talking, that their experience are the same as mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's I kind of try to find a balancing point between those two points by basically assuming that this is probably not your first game, but maybe it's that doesn't mean that it's your 50th game like it is mine,
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, I think obviously, given the influence of Planescape, the whole idea of factions was, I think inevitable, even if it's a optional thing in this system.
Yeah. Did you have more, or is that a?
Was that one of the things that you wanted to nail down early on? Is the idea of factions?
Not really. They kind of came in fairly late in the process. Honestly, they came in actually after I had stepped away from the game for a while and was working on Cross Time, because I had the factions as a central part of the Cross Time game. For those of you who didn't listen to the previous interview, Cross Time is my time travel game that has the factions of various time travelers as a central premise of the characters in that game, and the different philosophies of time travel being the central part of that. And so after I created the factions in there, I kind of ended up coming back to Infinitum and going, factions would be cool in here. And then I thought about, they worked really well in Planescape. Okay, it would be neat to put them in here, and then I went back and forth as to like, okay, but are they necessary? Are they not? Okay, well, I'll split the difference and make them optional. Because what I didn't want them to do was I didn't want them to dominate, because I wanted the bloodlines to dominate, because that's really because the difference between Planescape and Infinitum, the biggest difference in my mind is that Planescapes is all about the different beliefs of the factions in terms of what defines an individual character most definitively. And the thing that most defines an Infinitum character is their bloodline and the associated social class. The social class and where that places them in society is really important within Infinitum, and so that's their that the tension and beginning of class warfare is the threat of revolution is really a central part of the game, and so I really wanted that to be the central piece of it, and so I wanted that to be the dominant piece of it, the dominant piece of the character, and not to let the factions become dominant.
Which I have a feeling that's why you have it that the factions provide a certain leaning, but they're not a defining thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal.
All right,
that's why for a mechanical on a mechanical note, the bloodline provides an aspect. Fate terminology provides an aspect, provides a stunt, and then can provide a permission if you want to do magic. But then the faction, you have to use one of your free aspect slot if you want to take a faction, rather than it providing one of your defining aspect slots. You have to invest something into it rather than it being part of your defining piece of your character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see it, and I realize that within this kind of setting, magic use is something that's going to be treated as just another skill, essentially. So, with that in mind, do you treat magic as a skill, or do you treat it as a stunt?
It is a skill. Well, sort of. There's two kinds of magic of magical ability. There are, the main part is what is called crafting, and those are skills. Though you need to invest an aspect as what's called a permission in Fate terminology, because the idea is that the magic affects your personality, and so a fire elementalist or flame shaper in the terminology of the game tends to be fiery tempered, right? So so if you become a flame shaper, then you have to use one of your aspect slots and become fiery tempered or something along those lines, and then you can then take the flame shaping skill and put that into your skill pyramid. And then there's also what are called superior skills, which is a way to make your regular skills magical. And that takes a regular any one of your regular skills and makes it better than anyone else's skill. So it would be a way to get super strength or the ability to shoot an apple off of someone's head at a half a mile, or an example is literally stealing the color off of someone's hair, or so the idea is that you can do things that are with your mundane skills that are literally impossible, but make sort of metaphorical sense with it. That you can, for your athletics, you can literally run forever with disguise. You can, disguise yourself as literally anything, that sort of thing. So there's, whereas with the traditional magic, like elementalism or bio magic or teleportation or those sorts of things are all skills.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, moving into that, you do have a few skills that are in the category of crafting, and I think this is where a lot of the magic kind of skills would fall under in this
Yes.
category. And one of the things that I did notice is that it's built around a set of axes: order versus chaos, and shaping versus sharing versus shifting. Now, obviously, there's a lot of variation within them, but what would be some of the recurring hallmarks of each of those axes?
Yeah. Well, order versus chaos is your classic. Order is, things that are stable and the same and samey, and chaos is things that are very different. Being very chaotic. I can't think of a better synonym right now. But the shaping is elemental magic. For the it's the four classical elements plus light and shadow. Sharing is mental magic. It's like telepathy, empathy, illusions, and clairvoyance. And then shifting is a little more catch-all, but it's the idea of changing what's already there is the idea, and it's got changing your body, changing the natural world, teleportation, necromancy, and I believe I think that's it. No, wait. I'm sorry. Levitation, and there's one more that is escaping me at the moment. But it'll probably come to me in 10 minutes when we're talking about something else. But
yeah, that tends to be how this kind of thing works. But with that in mind, in some systems, when magic is used as a thing, there's usually some sort of catch, i.e., getting tired, only being able to use at a certain amount of times, some limited resource. Was that kind of thing ever considered for shaping?
Yes. Well, it was in an earlier iteration of the game. I originally used the the system that's used in the Dresden Files RPG, which uses a causing um, stress to yourself. It uses the stress tracks in the game
Mm-hmm.
to represent, exhaustion, uh, and that I. It's a good system to represent what the what's is in the Dresden Files book series, uh, but it didn't end up feeling like it was really necessary for what I needed for my game, and it is just really unwieldy. It's just a lot of bookkeeping,
Mm-hmm.
and so it always ended up being more trouble than it ended up being worth for me. So I ended up just kind of scrapping it and making the only cost associated with it simply being the investment of the aspect and the skill and the skill selection.
Yeah, I can get that, especially when magic is supposed to be so commonplace. And while magic is certainly
Yeah.
commonplace to a point in the world of the Dresden Files, it's not in the not in the same way.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, it's definitely supposed to be very mundane in Infinitum. That magic is not seen as magical, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Which I can certainly get. There's multiple ways to go about the idea of magic, and I see this as continuing on that whole not wanting to do the more Tolkien-esque affair, since well a lot of times in those situations you have the Vancian model, which I've made very clear I'm not a big fan of.
yeah, me neither. You'll notice that even D&D isn't really a big fan of the Avancian model, as they keep moving further and further away from it as the years go by.
uh well moving away from it, but still keeping just enough of it to annoy me and to
Yes.
reinforce all of my critiques. Because as much as as a bit of an aside, I do find it funny that the actual Dying Earth RPG doesn't use the same model.
Oh, I did not know that. That's good to know.
Yeah,
I'll have to look into it.
in terms of the whole spells per day metric, yeah,
Mm.
it doesn't use that. In terms of having to discover spells, having to memorize them, and having spells with ridiculously long names, that's still there, which is fine. That's the
Okay.
fun part. Unless you're Rincewind, who was made as a giant taking the piss out of the whole concept.
Yes.
Then again, I've called Discworld the first crack fic, but with that kind of thing in mind, I think one of the things that I appreciate that's in this that I don't see in some other Fate games is giving proper advice on making your own skills, making your own stunts, and even giving further definition on potential aspects.
Well, I can't fully take credit for that. Most of that comes from the Fate Core book. That I just chose to include it in my game, whereas a lot of people who use the Fate SRD choose not to. I just think it's useful information that I feel is worth preserving when bringing it over from the using the SRD, because I figure if it's something that I have available, why not bring in that very good advice. Some of it's unique to me, but a lot of it I couldn't tell you what is mine and what's theirs off the top of my head.
Yeah. I did. I think where it stuck out to me was in the in the aspects part of character
mm,
creation. There's a lot of times with aspects in Fate games, the approach they go with is high concept trouble and then a few freebies, but don't really go beyond that. And
yeah,
so
that was something that I decided to that I can take some credit for in terms of laying out the type of aspect. I kind of got inspiration there from something that just some people who put together some like just some fans who put together some uh, Marvel role playing like fate fate character sheets for Marvel role playing. Just there is no official Marvel Fate game, but they just put together some character sheets for Marvel characters years ago, and I grabbed them for some kids that I work with to play a game, and they had all their aspects labeled for, like, the it was, the high concept and the trouble, and then like the power and the secret, the identity, and I forget what it was, but the point was they all had a category, and I decided that I liked that. And apparently the Fate folks liked it as well, because they did something. They started doing something similar with the Fate Condensed, which is and so that's also they had something somewhat similar in their I believe their Fate Condensed one had the relationship aspects brought down, the relationship aspect specifically, which is why I pulled that. But they have the relationship aspect and then two freebies, and I brought the relationship aspect down, but then I have the bloodline aspect and the as well as the um, the high concept and the treble. So yeah, it just kind of brought it all together, because I my again, as I said, I've been working with this a long time, and it's had several different iterations. And earlier on, I had the old uh, phase system with the multiple phases that you're supposed to go through in character creation with your guest stars and all that. And while it's a cool idea, it's always ended up being something that was more of a hassle than it was worth. And it always kind of got left by the wayside. So just simplifying it down to a single aspect that is related to one other PC, I think, is a good sort of meeting ground, a way to make sure that your characters aren't just folks who met in a tavern, while not making it as complicated as a big old spider web of complex interrelated histories, as in the phase system of like Spirit of the Century and stuff.
Yeah, because obviously, when you're dealing with maybe 4 players, that's relatively manageable. When you're dealing with more, a little bit less so.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, when it comes to the getting things started, because that, as you mentioned, you don't want people to always start off with the whole meeting at a table. Do you provide a bit of story seed as far as some possible examples of starting points?
Yes, there's a section in there where it talks about campaign models. I think that's the term I use, but it talks about a few different possible starting points that are. It recommends that you come up with a central premise for your game, and it gives some option some recommended options like. One it recommends like I believe I call it the means because that's as in uh, the means is the means that the ends justify. So that's the kind of the spy the if that's being working as spies for hire or working for a noble family being working as spies, or maybe you're working as the uh, as the police force or as gang members, or you're working as in court politics. There's a few different options in there, but I definitely have always found that in my own games that it works best if you have a premise of why the players are working together, built in, and just so that no matter what kind of weirdness that they come up with, they have some investment so that they don't have a reason not to just wander off and ignore each other. Something stronger than they got hired for the same job. For the same, they're random adventurers who get hired for the same initial quest. So that's I always try to provide some options for that in my games. In several, usually, I have like one default one and then some other options. This Infinitum doesn't have a default though. It just has some variety of options. It's because it's a little bit of a broader campaign setting than say Cross Time, or Reality Redacted, which are both very focused about spies, or Americana, which is very focused about fighting extra dimensional demons. So they are you've got a little more room to play in the big city of Infinitum.
Yeah, that certainly would fit. And with that in mind, how long is now? Correct me if it's already out by the time we're recording this, but do you have a launch date in mind, or is that still being worked on, or is that?
I actually put it out a couple of weeks ago. I got it out for GM's Day, and so it's up on DriveThruRPG and Itch. Just search. You can either search Infinitum, or more probably better search Psychogenesis games, because there are other games named other products called Infinitum on DriveThruRPG. So you can, if you look under Psychogenesis Games, that's PSYCHOGENESIS games, you can find it a little more easily on DriveThruRPG and itch.
Yep.
And
I will be
so,
putting
yeah.
up the link on the YouTube description.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's available on both of those places, as are all of my other games.
Yep.
On both sites.
Yep, and I look forward to seeing how it shakes out. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and once again enjoy the madness that happens here. And
well, I thank you for inviting me.
Mm-hmm. And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Thank you.